Hey guys, Level Cap here. Today we're going to be reviewing Far Cry 5, the game that brings the whole franchise back around to Hope County, Montana. Now this is a fictional county in Montana, but it's rendered absolutely beautifully, very Yosemite-like vistas and views, and it provides us with a plethora of aerial vehicles that we can use to explore the county and do sightseeing missions, or even rain down death from above with armed helicopters and airplanes. Now, as is the case with most Far Cry games, you're relegated to a vast open world environment that you can explore at will and do missions at will, but ultimately your goal is to take down some crazy psychopath type person who's taking control of the area, and your job is to sort of liberate the area and take control back from it. Now, trying to sell this same premise in Montana, United States is a little bit tricky. The way the devs do this is they set up a cult-like environment in which a cult has taken over a huge area of Montana, well, Hope County in Montana, and it's very hard for anybody to get a message out because they're patrolling the borders and the air, and they also have people on the outside, allegedly, which is sort of alluded to early in the game. So the idea is that somehow the government isn't finding out about this, or anybody who comes in to try and alert the government or get message back either gets killed or they get subverted and become part of the cult. And so that's how they've maintained control of this area of the United States without the government supposedly finding out about it. It's a bit far-fetched, but you know what? As soon as you start to pick apart the details of any of these games, you'll be missing the point, which is that you really just need a slightly believable premise so that you can romp around in these fun open-world environments, completing missions and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, which really is what Far Cry 5 seems to be about. Now let's start off by talking about the visuals and the world design and sort of the believability and immersion. That's something that I think this game does better than just about any other open world simulator, save maybe Grand Theft Auto. Far Cry 5 pulls off a similar setting, and the visuals are just simply stunning from start to finish. Whether you're in an air, driving around on a quad, or taking a pickup truck through a forest, or just walking through some fields or exploring the grassland or doing some fishing, the game just looks immaculate. There's never a point in which I'm looking at scenery or part of the world and thinking, you know what, that looks kind of cheesy or that doesn't look too real. Everything seems to be handcrafted from start to finish. Beyond that, the game is also pretty well optimized on PC. Now granted, I wasn't getting 144 FPS, but I did crank the graphics all the way up to their ultra settings and played at 1440p resolution. Usually my frame rate was somewhere between 70 and 80 FPS, and if I was running an SLI system, I would be getting much better frame rate because this game handles SLI quite well from what I hear. Now really, I could spend a whole video just talking about the visuals, but really that's something best to be experienced firsthand, immersing yourself in the environment. I'll just sum up the graphics portion of this review and say this is without question one of the best looking shooters I have ever played, one of the best looking games I've ever played from start to finish. Every part of the world really looks incredible. Now let's talk about the gameplay a bit, which will inevitably bleed over into the storyline a little bit since they're so intertwined, but generally speaking, the gameplay is centered around this big open world environment. It's very familiar with previous Far Cry games, and I would even say Ghost Recon Wildlands. The format of this game is near identical to Far Cry 5. You have this big open environment with multiple districts of this environment that you need to liberate and complete missions in. You have your main storyline missions, which will take you from one storyline quest to the next one, which you can focus on if you choose to, or you can also do all the little side quests, which I do recommend getting into as they're usually a lot more fun and a lot more silly than the main storyline quest. Now, people have been making the joke that this game should be called Far Cry Wildlands, and I can't quite disagree with that because there are so many similarities between Ghost Recon Wildlands and Far Cry 5 in terms of the map layout, the way you run missions, the way everything's sort of set up in the game world. If you've played Ghost Recon Wildlands, getting into Far Cry 5 is like just a simple transition. It's like the same process through and through. The main difference, and this is possibly the biggest deal for Far Cry 5, is that it has a huge amount of personality compared to Ghost Recon Wildlands just being highly militaristic and kind of sucking some of the fun out of that game. I feel like most of these big open world games, most of the fun comes from doing crazy wild things like jumps or races against people or silly missions and having wildlife running past you and doing hunting and that kind of stuff. The fun comes from those sort of missions and that sort of open world silly environment. And Ghost Recon just took a highly militaristic approach to their game, and I feel like it became a little bit less fun because of that. But there were pros and cons and better things that Ghost Recon Wildlands did that Far Cry 5 doesn't do so much. For example, co-op. Co-op in Far Cry 5 feels a bit like an afterthought. You can play with one other friend, and the friend that's playing with you will not progress their missions, which is really sad actually, because it takes a long time to get through some of these missions. And if they're playing with you through the campaign and completing missions with you, if they log off and then try and play on their own, they're going to have to play all those missions over again, which is a huge letdown. Wildlands didn't have that issue, and you could actually make a lot of progress playing with your friends. In addition to that, Wildlands let you play with up to 3 other players for a 4-man squad, and there's many other ways to sort of join up and use tactics together, where one player could spot with a drone and do all these other distracting tactics, where Far Cry 5 sort of lets you do stuff like that, but really it's just 2 players going in and completing missions together. A lot of other weird little issues can crop up when playing in co-op, especially crashes. On the PC side, we had an issue where Jason, the guy I was playing with, would crash every time he opened his map, but it only happened in co-op mode. So I would say co-op in Far Cry 5 shouldn't be the main selling point of the game, but it can enhance the fun as long as your friend is okay with not making a huge amount of progress. The AI plays out very much like it does in previous Far Cry games. If you take a shot at a bad guy from far away and they sort of see you or hear the shot, they'll come and investigate where that shot was taken from. So if you move location, you can watch the AI predictably move up to that spot and look for you. They're not bad, but they're also not incredibly challenging either. And also sneaking up on a fort or a base or something like that and taking out the enemies can be relatively easy. Also, if you want to make it very quick, you can just hop into an air vehicle. If you're semi-decent with a helicopter, you can easily clear out an entire base from the air without ever having to land. Usually the only time I would die in the game is when I got overwhelmed by a large number of enemy that I wasn't quite expecting. But beyond that, most of the bad guys you run into are pretty easy to deal with. You do, however, get bonus points for liberating a compound without setting off an alarm, which I would generally expect to have the requirement of going in on foot and maybe disabling alarms or something, but you can actually just blow up the alarms with rockets from a helicopter. So still along those same lines, you don't really have to go in on foot and play stealthily. The game sort of lets you choose how difficult you want to make it for yourself, and I can consider that sort of a negative. I like games that force you into difficult situations or force you into situations in which you have to play in a difficult manner. Some of the most memorable single-player game experiences for me are the ones that challenged me the most, and Far Cry 5 certainly doesn't challenge. But then again, that often doesn't feel like it's the point of this game. It feels like maybe it's more the point to have air vehicles and gas trucks come careening in and exploding at crazy moments, and stuff catching on fire and wildlife coming in from the outside and starting to bite people and take them out like mid-firefight. And I feel like maybe it's more the point of this game is to have just crazy moments rather than highly challenging or strategic moments. And in that regard, Far Cry 5 excels and can lead to many awesome, memorable moments with friends, and so I think that's really the selling point. Alright, let's talk about the storyline, the cutscene integration, and the sort of pseudo QuickTime events that the game implements. At the beginning of the game, I thought they did a good job with sort of setting up the sequence in which you're trying to arrest John Seed, or the leader of this crazy cult, and that whole sequence is very good at setting up the environment and the ambiance of what's about to come for the game. But it also has a much more scary and dark tone to it, where you're dealing with these psychopaths that are leading this cult. Then you get into the game world and it's all very light and funny, and the dialogue from some of the NPCs is hilarious, and then it alternates back and forth between this very dark, serious, cult-like behavior and then very lighthearted, silly behavior. and it almost feels like the game's a little bit bipolar. I don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling or experiencing with the game. Should I be feeling more serious about the game or really committed to the dark undertones of what's happening? Or should I just be cracking up at the crazy wackiness that happens in the game world? It's really hard to know what the devs wanted me to get out of this game, or if maybe they're just throwing everything in there for me to sort of pick and choose. But it got to the point where I started to get really annoyed with the monologues and the cutscene sequences because they felt so out of place. Not to mention the fact that there's many big bad guys in this game that are just straight up psychopaths who want to hit you over the head with 2 to 3 minute long monologues, or even longer monologues in which they're telling you their idea for doomsday and all this craziness. And there's only so much of that I can take, to the point where I would say a couple hours into the game, I was just slamming that escape button to skip past every cutscene sequence of the game. There's so many of them, and they hit you all the time, and they interrupt your gameplay a lot of the time, where you'll just be running along and all of a sudden you get hit by some sort of magical bullet and you get captured and taken into control of these psychopaths, and they start monologuing at you. And I'm thinking, like, this gameplay tool here for just capturing you and monologuing at you is like the worst way to break up a really fun time, and it would hit you right in the middle of really fun chase or action sequences, and that part of the game I really didn't like. Fortunately, they do let you sort of skip past a lot of it, but it still ends up being my main criticism of the game, is that the monologues are very annoying. There's lots of them. They go on for too long, and they just feel out of place. They don't feel like they line up with what the rest of the game is about. Not to mention, throughout the campaign, you're captured like 6 to 10 times by these bad guys, and then they monologue in front of you, and then you always escape by killing like half of their henchmen and getting out of there. And I'm thinking, like, how many times do these guys have to capture you and let you get away before they're like, maybe we should just kill them right away? I mean, it's just, if there's one thing that's going to make you feel like your main villain is insanely incompetent, it's these capture sequences, which are, again, very out of place and weird. So I think they made a lot of weird decisions with the story and the way the story is presented to you in this game. But the overall world is a lot of fun when you're actually out in it and playing and enjoying the missions. It's just these sequences in between it all I consider to be a major detraction from the game. And it almost feels like the devs are just trying to show off how pretty their game looks when you put all the graphic settings on high and have a high fidelity character model talk at you for like 3 minutes. Now, putting the campaign aside, there's also the arcade and multiplayer mode, in which players can play against each other on a few pre-made maps, or they can create maps of their own or play with a huge variety of community maps that are out there. I'm sure the better stuff is still yet to have been created so far, and this is something that has existed in previous Far Cry games, and it's a cool way to basically launch a game with already pre-implemented modding tools. And I have to commend Ubisoft for adding this kind of stuff into the game. It's hard to predict exactly what's going to emerge from these modding tools, but generally speaking, people just have a lot of fun with them, and you can goof off and kind of create emergent gameplay, which is something that a lot of devs shoot for, is allowing the community to create things that they want to do and that they want to play. And people are already starting to do that in the engine, and it's quite powerful. So I'm still curious to see what's going to come out of this. It's hard to review it at this point in time because it's just so early on, but generally speaking, the community comes up with a lot of cool mods for the game, and this is shown to be very successful in other titles like Grand Theft Auto and stuff. Allowing the player base to start creating their own content for the game adds a huge amount of longevity and endgame content. So overall, I gotta say that Far Cry 5 is actually a really fun single-player game. If you really enjoy these open-world sandbox environments, there's few other games that can do as well as Far Cry 5 has done here. It is bogged down by some of the storyline and cutscene sequences. Again, you can skip those, so it's not a perfect game by any means, but it's still a hell of a lot of fun to have, and I imagine there's going to be a lot of extra content coming out for this game just based on the arcade and multiplayer modes alone. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review video, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.